So starting now?
Yep, starting now.
Officially now? Okay.
Only
So
now.
anyway, so since we're all mostly half trapped inside and my family's driving me insane, I decided that Brandon and I should talk to each other because if one thing, two dads talking to each other about being trapped inside and playing digital card games, I think this will work out perfectly. So if you're just joining us, this is pretty much week 3 in March 2020. We're going to talk about some Dark Draft. We'll do a little bit of touching base, just to kind of let you know status of Constructed. Now, I'm not sure if you noticed, it looks like they changed the in-game timer to, I'm not sure if it's 30 minutes, but it's at least 25.
I've seen that going on right now as well.
Yeah. Is it 25 or 30?
It's 25 right now.
Okay, so we're up to 25. So all my wonderful stories about all these timeout wins and everything else, unfortunately, those are going to probably be coming to an end. Now, that's not to say that some people don't still decide that instead of conceding or letting me win, they're just going to run the clock out because, you know, that still happens and it's usually the same person. I'm not going to name names.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I only have enough video of it, but anyway. So, there haven't been any other major changes that I've seen. They have run a what's it? It's like a singleton constructed. Basically, that format, which is in arena only, is they give you 60 random cards, all singleton, and you have to make a 30-card deck, and then you take that deck into the arena. Now, once you make a deck, you can't change it until basically you lose and you're knocked out. So if you get a really good one, you go in and play. It's been a fun experience. Have you tried this, Brandon?
I did build one deck. I had a fun game against Tubbs that went for like almost 20 minutes.
Cool. I have gotten, I thought I was doing really good, and then I got blasted out. It's like, oh yeah, I have all the burn. I'm like, oh, I have none of the burn.
Mine was a reoccurring fun deck that ended up building off of zeros and then giving them righteousness and +3/+3 and keep bringing it back.
Oh, justice prevails. Nice.
Yep. Kept looping it back, and I'm like, oh, wow, that is a pain in the butt, but okay.
Surprisingly, so we'll touch on Constructed for like just a moment. I've been seeing a weird trend. I don't know if it's just the way things are. Now, mind you, you can only play Constructed basically 3 ways. One is Challenge, so and that one doesn't count for your record. 2 is New Game, go over, hit Constructed, and then occasionally when it shows up in Arena. Right now, that's not how it is in Arena. So I've been playing a couple players that I see every now and then. I've been seeing a huge uptick in good tokens. I've also been seeing a huge uptick in heavy Sage, either Shadow Imp or discard decks, which has been entertaining. And the reason where I'm going to dovetail this is Psionic Assault is one of my favorite Dark Draft cards. So I'm already spoiling that right out of the gates. It's 1 gold, target player discards 2 cards at the end of this turn, and it recalls whenever you play a 1 gold Sage card. I love this card. However, I can say from personal experience, it only works in Constructed if you're able to keep the pressure on. It's surprisingly, this card strategy doesn't work good against control. It seems to work okay against aggro and mid-range, where if you keep them from being able to stabilize, so it can't be your main attack. You can't be like, Thought Plucker, Knight of Dusk, Psionic Assault. You can't just keep hammering their hand because they're doing this to me. I'm like, I'm going to play a draw 2. I'm going to play a draw 2. By the way, I run Ancestral Chant. I'll keep discarding the thing all day, every day. So, unfortunately, that card doesn't work. Now, when we start talking about Dark Draft, I'm going to mention how I love this card, and I've had people quit the second time in a game I play it. Anyway, so Dark Draft, you say?
Well, Dark Draft is an interesting, fun format to really dig into, and you really have to pay attention to the different cards that are coming your way, and don't forget that you have that burn ability that you can keep bringing back out to make more use out of it.
Well, the one thing I will say right away, if no one's done it yet, Tom's Epic Gaming, oneword.com, they were a very valuable source to me. They basically go like pick by pick. They evaluate cards for when the set rotated into the format, for how viable it is for Dark Draft. Like, they evaluate it for the sake of limited, which would be Dark Draft, and for the sake of constructed. And that was an invaluable tool in my early days. Now, mind you, you can't just stick to the guide, okay, you're done. But it gives you a very good footing because of how many times you go, oh, I picked, these 30 great cards. Well, if you picked all gold cards, you're in a lot of trouble. You have to remember to still pick zeros. And sometimes one of the strategies that gets overlooked by early players, and I'm guilty of this just getting back into the app, you sometimes have to even prioritize. If you don't have enough zeros, you might have to pass a bunch of tier 2 very solid pick gold cards in order to get some more zeros. Because if you're only making one play per turn, or maybe even only on your turns, you will lose.
Oh, definitely. And you do have to prioritize certain cards, such as Airborne and everything else, to make it worthwhile to you. Because there are going to be times where you're like, oh, well, I didn't pick anything that can deal with this Wing of Death, or other different cards that show up like that.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't, for some odd reason, my brain's blank. We draft 30 cards and we play those 30 cards, correct? Like, there's no deck construction. We just draft the 30, that's our deck, right?
Yeah, when you draft the 30, it is pure damage straight there, and that is what you get.
Well, the reason I'm bringing that up, that means you actually can violate the rule of balancing 2 gold cards to 1 zero. So unlike many other times, if I say wanted to run 30 zeros, which obviously will never happen, but you can actually break, in this case, the maximum you'd be able to do in constructed would be 10. Here, you technically could draft up to 30 zeros.
That is correct. If they happen to show up in a way that you could, yes, you could.
Yeah, no, I'm just mentioning more the fact, for example, like the Gargoyle, the Ambush Airborne Recycler. I love that card. I can run that literally as my only good card in my deck. So it's more like, unless you're worried about loyalty, you really should probably be picking cards that are good for your deck. And then obviously then we do have to talk about loyalty. We have to talk about recall. But one of the aspects is that you can take off faction zeros. Like, for example, if you're in a, say, good evil deck, you see a Frantic Digging, it's a free spell. It says discard a card, draw a card, recycle. That card, overall, I'm never unhappy to have that card in my deck. I'm not always happy to have it in my opening hand, but I could just take that, and it'll fit right in my deck. It doesn't matter whether or not I have any other Sage cards.
Oh, it's definitely one of those cards that it has a lot to go with it, and you can definitely make it worthwhile. And you do bring up the point that those zeros, even if they don't necessarily trigger a loyalty ability, it's not a big deal if they don't trigger off, as you will have things that can deal with them later on, and it may just be the body that saves you if you're in some situations. So it is nice to have those.
Well, no, it absolutely is. One of the things from Tom Sorensen, that's the one who has Tom's Epic Gaming, he cites a lot of things, and the knowledge, obviously, I don't want to use the term outdated because it does suit us, but when, for example, he put out the original evaluation of the 120 card, obviously that was without the context of what Uprising being thrown into the mix was, without Tyrants being thrown. So he actually put up a spreadsheet, which is, absolutely awesome. And some of the ones he actually cited as being basically your always first pick, and I'm actually going to read this verbatim, are the actually, no, wait, he actually updated his thing. Never mind, he actually did put it all in. But he has a set for Grave Demon, Amnesia, Erratic Research, and Heinous Feast. Basically, you need a way to interact with your discard pile because of recall cards like Lightning Storm, but also because of Army of the Apocalypse, Zombie Apocalypse. If you can turn some of those plays into one-sided, you arguably should be able to own that game.
Oh, very much so. There are a lot of things that can definitely help you out in certain ways. And
so,
go ahead.
No, I was no. Finish your thought.
Oh, there are a lot of different ways that you can end up building off of what you've drafted. But don't forget to look at the burn pile and see if there's a trend of cards that you're missing and your opponent's also missing.
Yeah, we definitely will have to bring up when we get a little more into strategy. Are there signals? Because there have been times you and I have played. I think we probably actually have a few videos up where I literally will get a pile and it's like 3 Sage cards, 2 Wild. There is no card I can take from that that's going to tell you, hey, whatever you do, make sure you don't take this. Because if I'm sending over, 2 Sage cards in a selection of 5 or whatever, sorry, well, technically, a selection of 5, I take 1, I send 4 over. But if if I send over those Sage cards, maybe I'm just getting flooded. But at the same time, though, so as you said, this is almost a multifaceted strategy, and I want to definitely encourage anyone who's just getting into this. This is actually one of the reasons I play Epic. It's why Brandon and I played physically back in 2016, and we basically just couldn't keep it going because it was just he and I and, families and whatnot.
No, that is a very big point of why we enjoy the physical or the app version of the game versus the physical play.
You didn't have to worry about this mana-based thing. You didn't have to worry about resource gathering like you act and like we said, you will lose half an hour or so, or rather technically invest a half an hour or so into drafting your deck. But then you have a 30-card deck that you helped build, and then. Well, I say help build because technically you were just given a bunch of choices. But you also have the fact that you're playing so many random cards. You don't need to worry about, I have 2 good cards. Will they come up at the wrong time? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But if those are the ones you pick, you kind of had to think about that.
Yeah, you definitely have to think more about the angles and other things that are coming up, especially when you're looking at what cards you've passed, what cards you've burned, and really get a good feel for what's out there. And you have a good idea of what you've been passing, which is a nice thing to have a quick and easy resource that you can go back and you can see, okay, I've passed these couple of cards. So I have some idea of what I'm going to face midway through when you're looking at like an Angel of Death. And you're like, do I really need to have that right now? And you're like, well, I should probably pick it up because of its airborne, because of its loyalty ability. Even if I might not be able to trigger it, it's nice to have.
It is, and I think if you actually take the time to invest in Tom's, I'm going to definitely say it's extensive research and diligence. There are the categories he has involved, and I'm not going to read everything verbatim, but I want to read the categories. Always first pick, always first pickable, so obviously there's differences. Always desirable, usually desirable, frequently desirable, situationally desirable, always acceptable, situationally acceptable, rarely playable, practically it's not like Magic, and we, obviously we don't want to make as many comparisons, but just for the sake of how drafting works here, in whenever we used to draft Magic, it was you want to pick this. These strategies are always the best. That's not always true in Epic, but there are certain abilities. Usually, mass board wipes. You want to have some of those, not conditional ones, just like Flash Fire. Don't get me wrong; those are good, but you want Apocalypse. Divine Judgment. Those sorts of things. You want ones that are like, hey, I'm going to clear everything out because it's very easy for your opponent to get ahead if they happen to get a lucky trick off. But then you're talking about Angel of Death. That is obviously very desirable if you're already heavy into evil. If you're not heavy into evil, then an ambush flyer might be more preferable, because if you don't have a chance to actually get the loyalty ability off of Angel of Death, that's when you have to start making those evaluations. Now, all this said and done, this is where things get tricky. When certain cards show up in the draft will dictate sometimes their priority. If Angel of Death shows up arguably in the first, I'd say, realistically, I want to say 7 picks, but probably 10 picks, you can still turn your draft around. But if you're not already heavy and evil and it shows up in pick 15, pick 16, you're going to pass it. Okay, it's airborne, it's a 6-5. but it doesn't do anything else. You want more combat tricks. You want to reinforce your loyalty, stuff like that. And this is where, when we had a discussion about random 30s, where we said loyalty abilities are probably at their lowest there because they're not dependable. Here, you get to choose how dependable some of these abilities are. There are times that it still won't trigger, but you also still can, you'll know ahead of time whether or not you have the prerequisite number of cards. And the app is nice enough that it will track all the cards you've drafted. Now, if in other physical games, you're even in physical Epic, you'd have to like pick up your stack, sort through it. Here, one click, like, all right, I'm good. Click, window goes away. It also, I don't mind the drafting part of Dark Draft. I can do that, asynchronously on a challenge. Playing, I still hate on a challenge unless it's someone I know we're actually playing the game in real time. But all that aside.
No, it is definitely a big part of it is knowing who you're going to run into and have, without the ability to have like a contract or like a talk before the game starts, you don't have that contract of, yeah, we're both on the same page, we want to play a game and get it over with in the next hour.
Yeah, I mean, that I just literally had a game against Matt Newberg last night. It was starting to run long. It was like 2 a.m. I'm like, hey, we'll pick this up the next day. And then we try to pick it up, and at one point I'm like, look, you're in like a 90% chance of winning. I'm just going to concede, no offense, because I can't make one play, come back 10 minutes later, to finish out combat or whatever. And I want to be able to play these things in real time, and that's when when White Wizards had Star Realms. I can do those asynchronous games. It's a little bit easier because you take your whole turn, then they take your whole turn. You don't have all these checks and be like, oh, I need to attack. Well, check that. And considering one of the primary strategies is to attack with one champion at a time, that's like 4 checks unless they use, Battle Pass, and not everyone uses Battle Pass.
And even if you do, there's times where you'll have it set up and a certain thing happens and it kicks everything back out. And then you're stuck in, okay, now I have to reset all these different setups that I had going. Let's start all over again.
Yeah, so now what are some of your favorites? So I mean, obviously I can go by what Tom's website has and say, what do professionals think? What are cards you like?
One of the cards that I'll end up probably picking up more often than not will end up being Soul Hunter. Yeah. While it's not necessarily the best card, it is definitely an enjoyable card to chamber off and go, okay, well, it does enough for me to make the end of the day better.
No, especially the fact that it can block for days if left unchecked, and that's where it comes in. When he says like the always first pick, Grave Demon, Amnesia, those, because Soul Hunter is one of the carryovers from the original game. It will not stay dead. And it's also technically perfect for discard fodder. They say Thought Plucker, you're like, all right, I'll put Soul Hunter in the discard bin. I'm fine with that. You want to put it out for free? Save me the gold? Fantastic.
And that's one of those things that I constantly look at it as, it's a single slot. It doesn't require any loyalty. It can be off color in the set I'm going with. And it also has that, okay, let's say I drew into something. I'm at 8 cards. Great, I'll throw it in the graveyard, I'll get it back in play for free, and it has an effect that continuously makes it a pain to deal with.
Oh, yeah. I mean, besides the really high picks like Lightning Storm, and the reason I say Lightning Storm, for 1 gold, you get 6 points dividable between players and champions. It recalls for 1 gold, so it basically is, how bad's the turn? Oh, you don't feel like doing anything? Recall it back to your hand. And it can also just keep hitting people for 6 every other turn, so it can win the game by itself. Same thing with Pyromancer, where it doesn't have to attack. It can just sit there and slam away the opponent's face. So, I mean, obviously, those cards. I'm not acting like I'm the one who said those cards are good. They're just good, period.
Oh, it's definitely that. I also do enjoy Plentiful Dead. As a 0 cost, putting the zombie into play, being able to keep recalling it for your gold cost is very useful.
Well, I mean, I like that, but as far as the payoff for some of those recalls, the reason that one's list say versus Psionic Assault. And again, I'm probably way more in favor of Psionic Assault. But Psionic Assault, hitting their hand for, and even if they know it's coming, you might rush them into a board wipe. They're like, oh, I only have 2 cards in hand, so I might as well play this thing. Okay, that's fine. Get your little impact, whatever. I'm still going to clear the board. And if you can get your opponent to living off top decks, living off a 0-card hand, once that happens, okay, you can leave Psionic Assault in the discard pile, whatever. It's getting your opponent to 0 cards. Once you get them to 0 cards and you have, say, 4 cards or even 3 cards, you're in such a good position to just, finish driving it home. That really is, a very solid setup. And in the first week of the app, when I was getting a few dark drafts or random 30s to go off, if I managed to get that to fire off twice in, give or take, in back-to-back cycles. So, like, at the end of your turn, I play it. On my turn, I recall it. End of your turn again, I make you discard another. Some players just like, look, I don't even care if you have a third calling it. You've devastated my hand for 4 cards. I can't keep burning these cards because, unlike in Constructed, you burning cards that say, okay, draw 2. And, that's a fine way to fight Sonic Assault. But you're burning, your board whips. You're burning your removal. You're burning your combat tricks. So, at the very least, Sonic Assault may technically hit 2 cards, but it almost hits a third of, because they have to burn that combat trick to keep fighting this. And if they don't have a way to clear this thing out of the discard pile, or a player does it with well timing, it can wreck a game. But obviously, it's a perfect storm scenario. I understand that, but when it actually goes off, it's almost magical. To me, that's like the Kark of Dark Draft, where if this thing actually goes off with consistency, it's game over.
Oh, very much so. Whenever you get into that situation where it's making or breaking the game by having that ability to continue moving forward or not. And there are times where you're sitting there with 1 card in hand, and that's all you got, while your opponent's sitting there with 6 cards in hand. They have a lot to do, they have a lot going on, and they can continue just moving forward in a way that works for them. And if you have that ability... Oh, go ahead.
So are there any cards that you think are either underutilized or you've seen them passed over more than you would expect? Are there any cards where you're like, why does this keep getting passed to me?
One of them ends up being Spore Beast more often than not. And I know it sounds kind of funny that it's like, okay, that's the 1 card. No, it really is just... You'll see it passed, and it has so many combat tricks that are useful that it's like, why don't you guys do something more useful? But that's just one of those like little nitpickers.
No, I can see that. For me, the ones that are a little telltale that they're not in faction are stuff like High King or Dark Assassin, because if they don't have Blitz, they're not quite as useful. They're not a liability per se, but they're just sitting there with 1 or 2 defense waiting to be out by those. However, you happen to just randomly collect a few. If you have like 5 cards, I really do think about Dark King a few more times than High King over Dark Assassin. Because if I have, say, 5 good cards, because he has Unbanishable, it is a little more resiliency. Now, admittedly, he does only have that 1 defense, so he can die to a few other little things. But there aren't many things that deal only 1 point of damage. Most things deal 2, and that would have killed the Dark Assassin. The bigger difference is that the Dark Assassin has a 7 on the front, so it can also be a threat. But obviously, it's not going to get through, and it dies to literally everything it trips over. So Dark Assassin having 7 on the front is more like I can trade up and block. That's it.
Very true.
Now, I will say, I think any of these 0, the free recyclers, I don't put them high, but around mid draft, if I'm hitting, pick 15, pick 16, and I'm like, what do my zeros look like? I'm not getting a lot of places. I start to put a little more priority on getting that priest of like Angeline, the gargoyle, those sorts of things. Just because not using your gold and seeing a new card is kind of important. And obviously that brings up why Grave Demon, Amnesia, and such are so important, is because it shuts down your opponent's ability to also recycle. So you're keeping them off of card parity. Now, card parity effectively goes, I use one card, you use one card to unmake it or whatever. So if I put down, a 6/6 flyer, or whatever, and let's just say a 5 toughness flyer. Let's just for the sake of discussion, and you have to use your 1 gold to use like Dracus Fire to kill it. We're not really changing things. Now the difference there is that Dracus Fire, depending if it's cast on your turn, only hits my stuff, or it also hits players. So I mean, like it's very hard to have true card parity. But when you have something that you can play for free, ambush or not, that's why I really like the Gargoyle, is because it can be played for ambush. It does alter the board, even in a slight way, but lets you see one more card. And in this game, many times in limited, I don't know how many times I feel like I was one more card ahead or one more card behind, because let's say that if they're only digging 2 cards and okay, whatever. But if they're digging 5, 6, 7 cards, that feels like they are seeing way more of their threats and options. And so sometimes one more card, one more blocker, that's something I think that you should evaluate depending how your draft is going. If your draft is going really good, you don't need your 7th board wipe. You could use, a free card recycler just to make sure you stay in business.
Very true. Or just even having recycle on a few of the cards that come through does make a huge step forward, in that you're continuing to keep things in hand. Because one of the most underlooked aspects to me is that the card in hand resource is really significant in this game, more so than it has been in other games, because you're always having a gold on your turn or their turn.
But the one, it's having the gold, but also, 2, there are no scalable events or champions. The example being, in other games that use resources, you can have scalable X cost spells. So if I just keep playing a resource, I'm like, all right, I'm at 7 resources, you're at 5, I have a resource advantage. Here, you only have board position, cards in hand, discard pile, and then that battle over the 1 gold. So, as you were saying, keeping cards in hand, keeping more options, those things are subtle. And I think sometimes when people feel like they were robbed from a victory, they're like, oh, I played so many better champions than them. And you go, you were only playing 1 or 2 champions a turn. I cleared the board 3 times. I drew 4 more cards. Yes, I didn't beat you in one swift stroke. It was paper cuts. Like, there was a 2 damage airborne, or I was using the Force Mage Apprentice 4 turns in a row. You don't see the little paper cuts. You're like, it was like lurking. You want to see these big plays, lurking giant or rampaging worm. Those are like those victories and losses. You're like, I can accept that. It was one huge play. But when it's a dozen paper cuts and it takes half an hour, you don't feel like the game was out of your control. But the reality was, it was out of your control. They just didn't have speed in their finish, but the game was never out of their grip.
Oh, very true. And it's also the idea of understanding that there are combos that are going to be happening that you may not realize at first. Just like having Pyromancer, where you can continue to keep using it to slowly increment those deaths. But by having like Fire Shaman with it, now you're starting off those combos where, okay, all that green that I was going to pull forward makes it so much more powerful, though, because I'm going to get 3 for free, I'm going to be able to spend my gold on their turn for 4, and I can keep building up on this as an incremental advantage.
Yeah, I mean, obviously for me, because of how much I love Pyromancer, I mean, I know Tom's ratings are basically spot on, and he basically all but cracked the egg. He has all the answers. For me, Pyromancer, I don't think that would be in the always first pickable, so it's like just outside of tier 1, because every time if I get that to stick, if you get 8 direct damage out of that card, that feels so good because it is one card doing all that. And so when you're using your gold, on your turn, on their turn, deal 4 damage, you're not spending cards. You're slowly reamassing your hand size. And they're going, we got to handle this thing. We have to. Well, they're going to spend more resources killing that thing because it's got 7 defense. So it doesn't go down to Dracus Fire or whatever. I mean, like, it doesn't go down to everything. It doesn't fall over like High King does or Dark Assassin does. But obviously, everything has its balance in this game.
Very true.
Do you feel Blitz is more or less valuable in Dark Draft in the context of the kind of game that this is?
Blitz is very important and definitely something to keep your eye on, especially when you're, let's say, if you're running tokens or you have some creatures already in play, you may be able to bait out their gold just so that they can get a blocker to maybe do a kill that they should have saved for that 10/10 that has Blitz, or that effect that's going to come in that's going to leave them in a position where you're in the advantageous side of winning.
Now, would you say it's more or less valuable than Ambush?
That is a hard sell to go and say that it's better than Ambush. Just because the ability of having it go on your turn and using your opponent's turn to draw more cards has been more advantageous to me. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's far off. It's a close battle.
All right. Well. I mean, obviously, I'm just going through like mechanics. What do you think about, say, Breakthrough? So right now, you're saying Ambush is winning, but by a little bit. What do you think of, say, Breakthrough?
Breakthrough to me, if it's as the spell that'll give Breakthrough to a creature as a surprise bonus, is great. But if it's just sitting on the creature, it by itself is kind of like, okay, well, I know I have to deal with that. Or I can take and I can just chump block a little bit of it. It's not as important to deal with right this second. It doesn't lead to misplays as much as Blitz and Ambush do.
Well, what about then, say, Airborne? So now, obviously, I know some of these abilities combine, and Strafing Dragon is like, it has the trifecta. It has Blitz, it has Ambush, it has Airborne. But I'm just saying, take things in context. They only have one ability. So we're saying Breakthrough on a champion is lower than the other two. Where would you put Airborne on champion?
Airborne is nice, and I'd have it over Breakthrough, simply because Evasion does have a significant effect on the game where it's going to be a repeatable threat, and it needs to be assessed and addressed more instantaneously than Breakthrough. Just because.
But what about versus Blitz and Ambush then? It's right now you're saying it's number 3 in this 4-tier system. Is it better than Blitz? Is it better than Ambush? And we're taking it just in its sole context. So a stupid vanilla Angel of Death, no triggered loyalty. Would you rather that? Would you rather Ambush? Would you rather Blitz?
I'd rather Blitz than Ambush than going Airborne.
And then Breakthrough somewhere down the lane somewhere.
There's not enough of it that makes it useful, other than having it on a spell like Rage, where you can give Breakthrough so that you have that ability to play around with it. When it's sitting on the front face of the creature, it's like, oh, okay, well, I know I have to deal with it, but I can get away with it for a few turns, or ignore it for a few turns, return it for a few turns. Where Ambush and Blitz, if you return it, great, you just gave me something else to replay, especially if it had an ability. Even if it doesn't, it's not as much of a loss of that turn or that use as, say, having that Breakthrough guy. Like, let's say you have the 8/12 that gives you the gold, you accidentally spend the gold, they bounce it back, now you're sitting there with the dead hand.
Thing.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
Brachiosaurus is the one I'm thinking of with Breakthrough. And it's one of those things where there are a lot of ways that Breakthrough is able to be dealt with in a significant manner that can set them back a turn or 2 turns or 3 turns, where you're like, well, that's not really a threat to me anymore. I'm not worried about it.
So, what else would you say to people that is? I won't say a selling point, because a selling point in Dark Draft is simple. It really is the best way to do 1v1 draft, which most games kind of really flop down on because you want to simulate new cards. Actually, technically, we did not actually cover what Dark Draft was.
Oh, that's fair.
So I'll let you cover that part. I just realized we're talking about burning cards and drafting. We actually did not discuss how this operates.
No, we didn't, and that makes sense. Basically, Dark Draft is going to be 10 rounds. At the start of the round, you're going to see 5 cards where you will select one of those cards. The other 4 go to your opponent. You will then receive 4 cards from your opponent, in which you will take 2, giving you 3 cards for the round. That's why you're going to have 10 rounds. You'll get 30 cards, and then you will burn those 2 cards that came that you didn't pick. Get left over, they get burned.
All right, now just to make things clear, because I was obviously talking about not 10-round numbers. My discussion of picks would be I pick one of 5, and then I pick one of the past 4. So Brandon saying a round is 2 picks. I was going strictly by pick number, just so things are not completely lost. So when I'm saying pick 15, pick 16. I'm looking at the tail end of round 7, beginning of round 8. So you only have so many more picks to keep going.
Oh, very true. And you can look at each round and each pick as its own number, considering you'll have pick 1, then pick 2 and 3 at the same time. Then you'll be on to pick 4, and then 5 and 6 at the same time.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, I probably confused things way more than you did. So anyway, I'm just going through Tom's list because there's a couple things that stick out. One of the funny things is your love of Soul Hunter is right below the bottom of the barrel. That's kind of funny. But anyway,
it's perfectly fine, and it's one of those cards where I'm like, I like to see it passed, just because it's just stupid card to me that I enjoy the way it plays. I have no reason to say that it would be any better, because there's so many other things that are great, but its reoccurring effect is just so unique.
Well, speaking of unique, I want to highlight some terrible combos I've seen only once or twice in Constructed, but I've seen in random 30s. Vital Mission, which by all accounts is a god-awful card. It's 1 gold, banish target champion, its controller gains life equal to its power. If this was your creature, also draw 2 cards. That's absolutely that's just awful. It's one, I mean, as opposed to like actual banishing, which is like, okay, banish a card. If it was like during an opponent's turn, they draw a card. This is far worse, because if you're giving them life back and you're trying to race them down, it's much harder. And why would you banish your own guy? Because unlike in other games, if these 2 things deal damage and it's going to die, it dies before you can play this card. However, Vital Mission on unbanishable, specifically Thundarus and Gladius, you target it, it will not banish it. So you just draw 2 cards and gain some life. It's a really cool, entertaining. Complete downside, you paid 1 gold to draw 2 cards and gain some life. Now, if you do it on Thundarus, you're gaining 10 life. Okay, that's a little bit of a different discussion. But it's one of those stupid little combos that works, but also, if you drafted all that together, you're probably doing terrible.
You're probably doing something wrong if those were the picks that you wanted to go with.
Well, to be fair, if I see Thundarus on my absolute first pick, I'm like, it's a pretty big body, and then I see Vital Mission, I'm like, guess what I'm doing?
Well, that's just because you're like, okay, you don't take the game seriously, and to a fault. You'll have the fun, you do want to play to win, but at certain points you do have to just say, this draft is just for fun, or this round is just for fun.
Well, especially when what we're looking at Dark Draft, you it either has to be an arena thing or it has to be like new game challenge. If it's in the arena, oh my, I most people that play arena, I am so much lower in skill than them. If I try to take it seriously, I know they're gonna like pick Amnesia and then send over like cards where I'm like, oh, Thundarus and Vital Mission, the same pack, fantastic. Guess who's doing the combo? And they're just like, I'm just gonna take every first pick possible, and you can have the remains. I'm like, do I get all the remains?
So you're telling me that I'm getting all this terribleness for free?
You're telling me not only do I get one pick of it, I get 3 picks per round, but I get everything that I want. That's cool.
Yep, sounds amazing. Let's continue this.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I'm shipping over, really awesome cards.
Like, now, why did you do that? And you're like, I don't know what you're talking about.
One of the things that I find interesting when you lay them all out in a grid like Tom has, sometimes obvious picks are obvious. Here's what I mean. Kong and Sea Titan are just good. They're just ridiculously efficient. Now, of course, in this game, being efficient is what's the word I'm looking for? There's only like really 2 kinds of efficient. There's efficient for free and efficient for gold. But here, example would be with Kong. Okay, it's slow, so it has to be played on your turn. But it's a 13-14. Then it comes down and deals 13 points of direct damage to a champion. Most likely killing whatever it shoots at. There are a few that get out of its range, like opposing Kongs and Thunder. But it comes down and it shoots most large bodies. Then you have a 13-14. That thing's just amazing. It's amazing in every format. It isn't loyalty. It just happens when you play it. Sea Titan, 1 gold, 11-14, untargetable. Return target champion to its owner's hand. But it's also untargetable, meaning there are times where I've seen these things come down on an open board just because an 11-14 untargetable makes people miserable.
Oh, very much so. And even if you're not using it necessarily as, I need it as a beat stick, but just to get that ability to bounce from what it's doing.
But not just bounce, because in other games, we have some other ones like that Time Bender, where, okay, it could gain Blitz, but it's only a 2-4, but it can banish zeros and bounce regular champions. Okay, whatever, it can do it turn after turn. 11-14 untargetable. If you're put on your heels, this thing will absolutely be a defensive powerhouse. It'll sit there chewing up the scenery, and obviously, without tricks, it'll be able to block a Kong heads up. They will not kill each other. Obviously, then, though, Kong, of course, gets some sort of, extra bonus or whatever, and you end up killing the Sea Titan. But many times, in order to kill a Sea Titan, you need to either clear the board or you need to expend more resources than you think are possible. So this thing usually will sit there chewing up the scenery. You have to keep putting out token generators, urgent messengers, and after it eats those 2 humans, it's coming for your face. You need to, in one way or the other. And being untargetable, I know I keep harping that one selling point, but that is just it. If it was just an 11-14 that came in and bounced a champion, whatever. I wouldn't care as much. But it repels return, which is so good. It sits there blocking so many things. They're like, oh, I have, this 10, like the Triceratops. A 10-10, it comes in, draws a card. This guy blocks it, kills it, shrug. Doesn't matter. I'm like, all right, that's pretty good.
Very much so. And also, there's a lot of things, like even the Sea Hydra to me is a very interesting card.
Oh, Sea Hydra is interesting. I have to at least recognize it is a trap. The Sea Hydra is a trap. It's a card I love to death, and if it was in my random 30s, I'm giddy when it's in my random 30. I truly am. I love the card in random 30s. When we play Demigods, I love the deck that has it in its Demigod thing. But the problem is, it's a 5/10. Good news is, it comes down, it cantrips, it gets you a card back. Cool. Whenever it takes damage, at the end of the turn, if it doesn't die, it gets that many +1/+1 counters. That's cool. It does not have Breakthrough. It does not have Airborne. It does not have Ambush. It does not have Untargetable. Like this thing, admittedly, what is it? Citadel Scholar? Yeah, Citadel Scholar. The one that gets a +1/+1 counter every time you draw a card. There are certain cards, they grow, okay, but they still can be bounced. They still can be shot dead. They can still be blocked by a human all day, every day. I like Sea Hydra, but I guess I think to me, you like Soul Hunter the same way I like Sea Hydra, where you try to shoehorn it in. You're like, this is the best card ever, and then you still lose because it doesn't have Airborne or Ambush or any of those tricks.
I know, it's definitely one of those cards where I'll pick it up and I'm like, I know this is terrible, but this is the right kind of terrible.
I don't care that it's pick one. I will define my exit. I will play. This will be my only wild card. I will play it.
All day long.
And I think therein lies a transition from beginner/casual, because we're kind of lumped together. Beginners don't know any better. Casual doesn't care. So I guess we're more of a liability because we're unteachable. But to the next level, you have to learn what are the traps. And if you look at Tom's rubric and everything else, the prioritization for what cards are better than others. Now, overall, the list is almost gospel. I'm using the word almost, and he even has caveats there, such as, here we go, the ones that are situationally desirable, which are better than always acceptable, but all these situationally desirables have loyalty too, or a loyalty trigger or whatever. So if you can't trigger their loyalty or recall ability, then you go with the next tier down, because those ones don't have a loyalty trigger. And that is very skill testing. We talked about it earlier with Angel of Death. How early do you take it? Because if you get it too late, it's useless. If you have to kind of see through what are the traps, in other gaming terms, we used to call them skill testers, where if you can make it work, you're really good, but too many people think it's always good, where it's situationally good, it has its place, and its place is, let's say you dark draft 10 times. It might be only one of those dark drafts, and you might even see it in that deck. But for people like us, we take it 5 times trying to find that one time, and that's like just beating your head against the wall. I'm like, yeah, if I was paying money for this, I probably wouldn't do it. But just playing for free and enjoying it, I like taking some of those gambles. But if you want to actually get better at this game, you have to recognize why certain cards are better in certain formats. And we'll just talk about the 3 free ones right now, the Random 30, the Dark Draft, and Constructed. Some cards that are absolutely amazing Constructed are amazing because you're running a deck that has 30-plus cards that trigger this thing's loyalty. In Dark Draft, you can control whether or not that thing gets its loyalty just by how early you take it and how saturated your deck is. Random 30, you have no choice. You just half the time play it to play it. I play a Raging T-Rex, no loyalty whatsoever, but it's a 12-10. I'm like, I'll at least start gobbling up the board. But that card ranges from absolutely genre defining, because for Wild Sage, that's one of their top includes in Wild Sage is Raging T-Rex. In Dark Draft, it's a take it or leave it. It depends on when you get it and whether you're set up to use it. And in Random 30, it's total crap. But unlike in other games, every card has its place in this game. Whereas in other games, they designed so many sets, they had to make filler. They made cards that you shouldn't be playing unless there's a gun to your head. And, sometimes there is. Like, there are certain formats, like Pack Wars and Magic, where you're just given a pack, you have to put lands in and play it. For us here in Epic, that's our Random 30. So sometimes you do have to play some cards that don't fit. But at least these cards all have a home. That's not true of other games. So while there are not as many cards as other games, here at least we say it's good in this format, it's bad in this format. We can evaluate. We can actually give these things a very good evaluation. That might change from set to set. Like, for example, Chamberlain Kark. Whenever Pantheon comes in, I've said multiple times, I don't know when that'll be. It could be years. Whenever Pantheon comes in, you're going to stop seeing Kark as much because some very good hate shows up, but also some genre-changing cards show up, for better or for worse. So at the very least, the status of the game right now, Chamberlain Kark in Constructed is something you have to consider, Whereas in the future, you're going to be seeing it less and less. It's going to be keep getting beat down. People stop playing it. Now, how that affects Dark Draft, if in Dark Draft, because obviously there's always going to be a four-way split. The game was always designed. There's always one-fourth of the pie is divided to every faction. That part doesn't change. But as more and more of these big, fat loyalty 2 bodies come out, where their only loyalty is I draw a card, their value goes way, way down because you start finding the ones that have tribute, which means when this comes into play, it automatically goes off. Those become more valuable. So if you say have a 7/7 for 1 gold, loyalty 2 comes in, draws a card, I would probably prefer a 5/5 with tribute where it guaranteed gets the card every time. And then you start to see that a little bit with where we're at in the game, but there aren't too many cards I think that dropped in value when the other sets came in. Well, actually, I'm sure if I dug around, there probably would be a few more. But things definitely can get really crazy in this game, and I still don't feel like I truly understand why certain picks are there, other than Blitz is better, better than Breakthrough, which Airborne is also better, but Ambush is the best. And you start going, oh well, this has Airborne and Ambush, so its ability goes up. We don't care that it has like loyalty 75 or whatever. So many of these cards that are evaluated are actually evaluated almost off the reliable keywords, which is something I just have to learn to stick to, as opposed to the appeal of cool things like those loyalty X guys.
Very understandable, and it's one of those, it shows up and you start wondering what's going on with it a little bit, and how can it be useful to you.
Well, Xanos is probably the pinnacle of, I'm not sure when this card stops being valuable. Because Xanos, obviously, in Construct is amazing, but you get to pick your deck. Xanos has loyalty X. When it comes in, reveal X evil cards. Your opponent loses X life, you gain X life, you gain X tokens. Well, how many evil cards do I have to have before Xanos is viable? And let's say I get him, and he's the 20th card that I pick. I have 3 other evil cards. That means I almost need to go on an evil rampage, getting only evil cards as I go from here on out.
Very true.
Well, but that's therein lies my problem, is I'm not mentally flexible enough to yet understand when cards that are on the sliding scale, when they've slid too far. I can tell you from certain formats, you base it off of the resource requirement. Here, the resource requirement mostly is loyalty. That seems to be the coin, if you use the term coin of the land here. But that seems to be, can you trigger the loyalty? Is it too late for you to trigger the loyalty? Those are the big things. But also sometimes when you get 5 cards and you ship off 4 good ones, as you were saying about how it then reads, oh, well, they're doing this. Well, in those later picks, they might not be doing something specific so much as, like I just mentioned, you're trying to trigger loyalty. So I'll take a mid-range evil card over a better choice Sage card because I'm trying to trigger. I have 3 loyalty 2 cards. I need these things to trigger, so I'm just taking anything that isn't utter garbage. Your love of Soul Hunt would fit right in. If I have Angel of Death, but I just don't seem to see evil cards, I see Soul Hunter as the only evil card in a pick of 5. As long as I'm not sending off something that's going to murder me outright, I might take that Soul Hunter because I want Angel of Death to trigger off. Plus, it also pairs with Angel of Death.
Very much so. And there's a lot of different things that you can look at as far as if you've gone far enough into your 0 cost that you have enough that are Airborne, Ambush, and you can start using your gold primarily as disruption, almost as if you're in more of a constructed style deck, as opposed to...
But that is so hard.
That is very true.
I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong. I mean, that's probably everyone's goal. But at the same time, man, to actually get that level of, oh well, all my champions, like 50% of them have airborne and ambush. I'm like, wow, you picked a lot of crazy stuff.
That is very true, and it is definitely one of those things you got to keep an eye out for. Just because there is so much crazy that's going on, and so many different other crazy things that you can run into.
Yeah, and that kind of falls into where this game has its roots, with those former Magic Pro players. You're used to a certain set of evaluations. Well, if you bring those evaluations into this game, the problem is those evaluations aren't true because the saturation of crazy is so much higher that it's now the new norm. It's like if you're used to how expensive BMWs and Volkswagens are over in the U.S. Well, if you go over to their country of manufacture, you're like, man, these are so much cheaper. Why is my Mustang from the U.S. like triple value? It's you just need to get used to the market of the cards. So I mean, to put a nice little dovetail on before we sign off, Dark Draft is definitely its own beast. Just because you like Constructed doesn't mean you need to play Dark Draft. Just because you like Random 30s doesn't mean Dark Draft has to be the next. Dark Draft is a very unique experience because you're actually fighting the opponent. The first half of the game, the draft, is psychological warfare. What are you sending over? What are you taking? Because you can easily have already lost the game by going halfway into your pick. And you're like, I have too many Loyalty 2 cards. I'm in all 4 factions. Nothing gels. I'm playing a bunch of trap. And they already beat you before you even shuffle up. So Dark Draft is an emotional investment, I would say, because you have to, one, get a good grip of what you're doing and stay on task. And then two, you also kind of sort of, because like there is a pile that says what are the cards you burned, what are the ones you passed. You can kind of figure out what they may or may not be taking, so you have a little bit of a heads up. Whereas obviously in Constructed or Random 30s, you don't know anything until the cards start getting played. So this one you have a little bit of foresight, but how do you capitalize on that? So you can go really deep. You can really invest. You're testing your memory, testing your judgment. You can do a lot of that, but you can also just have fun and just slowly get better. Be like, all right, well, if I don't have X number of wild cards, I'm not going to take the T-Rex if it shows up later. Start showing some more self-discipline. And so, I mean, like, it's weird because the values change, but also you're playing only one opponent. You're not playing the whole table. You're not like, oh, I passed Angel of Death. I took this thing first pick and I passed Angel of Death. So clearly someone's heavy evil. You can't guarantee that your opponent took it. So you can't guarantee just because you keep sending them these top level evil cards that that's what they're doing. You can kind of guess that's what they're doing, and maybe you should make adjustments for it. Like maybe you take I want to call him Holy Knight. I can't. White Knight. There we go. Got there. Like maybe you take White Knight, you start sending over a ton of evil cards, but at the same time, you still need a good deck. You still need to go, is this card good? Okay. Do I have enough 0 cards to make my deck more streamlined? There's a lot of things to kind of keep your eye on that can drive you nuts. So I definitely recommend playing the format. I think the format's a ton of fun. But don't lose your mind trying to be the best overnight. This one probably has the most bad beats out of all the formats, because Random 30s you can just lose based off what they draw, also off what you draw. Constructed, you might face a better player who has a better pairing of decks, and maybe you just got paired wrong. Dark Draft, half the war is won or lost based off what you take. So you can actually lose the game for yourself before you even shuffle, and that is maddening.
Oh, it is very maddening when you can go, I've lost everything because of something silly.
Oh, didn't we draft one time and I just said, hey, I lose and concede?
That happened when I drafted tokens and then transformed everything into 4/4 demons after attacking with the tokens.
Yeah.
And you're like,
yeah.
Why did you do that?
Well, I knew I passed it. I just didn't think you were going to do that. And then surprise, you did that.
And that's part of it, and that probably is the biggest lesson to draft, is you will be surprised by the things that happen.
But I think if you approach it in a fun way, as opposed to the I'm going to be the very best, yes, the very best around, I'm going to catch them all. But as long as you don't approach it from that mentality and you actually try to learn and get better, I think this can be a very good tool. The same way, because some retired Magic pros actually went off to play poker, and they said poker was easier because you learn certain tactics, how to read people, how to read plays, and stuff like that. If they're playing their hand fast and loose, they go down to 2 cards, and all of a sudden they start conserving cards. I think that means you put the pressure on that they don't have anything. But if they're playing, only 1 card on your turn only, and they're playing very conservative, I think that means you're up against a better player who's trying to set the pace of the game to their terms. So if you can start to read their plays, you might also be able to learn how this game is going to shake up. Are you in for a long haul, or is it time to go, strafing dragon followed by rampaging T-Rex and unload your hand? Because sometimes unloading your hand is the right play, provided, of course, you've read the fact that they can't stabilize.
And that's a very important thing to realize, too, is that there are going to be times when they can't stabilize, and it's worth just cashing out on what you can commit to. Not overcommitting, but definitely don't feel that you need to hold something back just in case.
Yeah. So while we're signing out, I'm gonna we'll put the link in the show notes, the description. Check out Tom's Epic Gaming. Look for his Dark Draft evaluations. They are a solid basis for anyone. Just understand someone smarter than us, and probably smarter than you if you're just starting, has put way more thought into these evaluations. They're not perfect. Feel free to deviate if you feel the time's right. But at the same time, don't be surprised when they get proven over and over again to probably be superior calls. The example of, basically of the pure discard clearing effects like Grave Demon and Amnesia, Heinous Feast, Erratic Research. Don't be surprised if those cards come out of nowhere from your opponent and blow you out because you lost your entire pile, and all those recycles now don't matter. You lost your recall card, and now you're up a creek. Don't be surprised if some of the top picks do, in fact, all but win the game by themselves. But if you pass one, don't feel like, oh, the game was over. There was a Grave Demon sitting next to an Amnesia, and I had to pick one. Well, no one can affect the fact that you had to pick one. Sometimes there's going to be a no-win split to the draft. It happens. But what you do from that point is you learn, and you learn to try and anticipate that. Because if I send an Amnesia to Brandon, I know he's going to take it. I don't know what the second card in the 4 cards are that he's going to take. But at the same time, if he ships me an Amnesia, I have no idea what you took over this. I'm definitely taking an Amnesia. So, I mean, it's I know, I'm rambling. I'll leave it there. Check out tomsepicgaming.com. He switched kind of from blogging to video towards 2017, 2018. But for right now, most of his written work applies to the game as is. It's a lot of good canned knowledge from people who played the game way more than most of the people that are playing now. So I would definitely call that a good source. And with that, I will say, Brandon, outro. Or final thoughts, then outro. Pick something.
It definitely is one of those things where even if you don't think he's better, he's invested the time and the resources to write these columns, to write different things that are resources that you can use to further a different perspective. So that you have these options and you have the tools, and these are all free resources. Taking 5 to 10 minutes while you're sitting on the toilet to read it makes a big difference whenever you're actually having that opportunity to sit down and play, whether physically or online, like we have the opportunity to do now. So, like, share, subscribe.
More than the opportunity, yeah. If you're furloughed like I am, and you're holed up inside your house, and you're doing your spring cleaning, when you take some downtime before you go to bed, or you're just taking morning coffee or whatever, instead of reading how terrible the world is, maybe make yourself a little bit better and learn something. Now, that sounds like an NPC, the more you know, but I think overall, versus all the crazy stuff that we're seeing, becoming a little bit smarter is probably better than seeing how everyone else is becoming dumber.
Very much. Like I said, like, share, subscribe, stay safe out there. and wash your goddamn hands.